It is a great privilege for me to introduce today's speaker, David McCullough. Situated on the former estate of Josiah Quincy Jr., Eastern Nazarene College has long been committed to academic excellence and the time-honored values upon which America was founded. Faculty continue to encourage ENC students to delve into the nation's rich history to discover the usable past needed to create a brighter future. Few have given Americans a more usable past than has David McCullough. Born and raised in Pittsburgh, he attended Yale University, where he met and fell upon the spell of Thornton Wilder, whose writing influenced him a great deal. Called the Citizen Chronicler by Librarian of Congress James Billington, McCullough has ranged over the centuries in his highly readable and masterful works. His biographies of Harry Truman, Theodore Roosevelt, and John Adams have inspired a generation of Americans. In 2008, the latter premiered as an award-winning HBO series, which ably captured the spirit of the revolutionary generation and depicted the bucolic beauty of Braintree, Massachusetts, with breathtaking artistry. Most importantly, McCullough believes in writing history for all Americans. His literary skills and keen insights are widely recognized. Mr. McCullough seems born with an ear for history, wrote a reviewer in the New York Times. He has a gift for ferreting out the past's most interesting and important stories and retelling them with compelling simplicity. Yale University honored him with these apt words. As an historian, he paints with words, giving us pictures of the American people that live, breathe, and above all, confront the fundamental issues of courage, achievement, and moral character. McCullough may well be the most readily identifiable historian in America. He is the antithesis of the cloistered scholar writing narrow monographs for a few dozen academic specialists. For many years, he wrote for American Heritage and narrated PBS's popular American Experience documentaries. He continues to deliver lectures to high school history teachers, students, and the general public. McCullough is also one of our most distinguished historians. He has been awarded numerous honorary degrees and has won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, 2 National Book Awards, and 2 Francis Parkman Prizes from the American Society of Historians. Would you join me in welcoming our speaker, David McCullough?
President McGee and members of the Board of Trustees, distinguished faculty, Mr. Mayor, former Mayor Sheets, friends of the university, proud parents, proud grandparents, and you, the members of the distinguished class of 2009. I am privileged to be given the chance, the singular chance, to address this wonderful celebrant gathering. And I thank you very much. I'm also, I have to tell you, one who loves commencements. We have no more moving, no more relevant, no more worthy ceremony in our civic secular life than commencements, with people gathered from all walks of life, all parts of the country, even of the world, to celebrate hard work and a worthy achievement in the quest for learning. It is truly cause to be grateful, cause to issue congratulations to one and all, and cause to reflect a little on what maybe it's about. At the age of 14, the boy acquired his first ever book. And it was a small leather-bound volume of Cicero in Latin. And in it, he wrote, because he was so proud to have a book, he wrote his name 6 times. In the house where he was born, a few miles from here, there was probably not any books except the Bible and a few religious tracts. His mother was almost certainly illiterate. His father, we know, could write his name. And yet that boy, because of education, went on to make one of the most distinctive and valuable marks in our whole story as a people. The boy that somehow acquired a book at the age of 14 would later, as President of the United States, sign into law the creation of what would become the greatest library in the world. He was an indifferent and even reluctant student at first, but because of a teacher here in this town, whose name was Joseph Marsh, he was treated with kindness, and as a consequence blossomed and could not get enough learning, could not read enough every day. And at age 15, he was granted a scholarship to Harvard. Because he went to Harvard, because he had the chance to go to college, and Harvard, please keep in mind, at that point, had a faculty of 7 and all of 4 buildings. But because of that break in his life, the boy, as he said, discovered books and read forever. He became the most widely and deeply read American of his very bookish time. He never stopped reading. He read Shakespeare through all of it, at least twice. He read Cicero again and again. Cicero became his hero. He read Pope and Swift and Defoe and Samuel Johnson and Cervantes. As a young lawyer riding the circuit here in Massachusetts, he carried Don Quixote in his saddlebag. He read these books closely, and he thought about what he read. For what is the life of man if memory of the past is not interwoven in the life of later times? He read in Cicero. History, the importance of history, the essential importance of history to one who wants to be a leader. But he also saw the pitfalls of too much erudition, of being too bookish. He read that in Pope. The book-full blockhead, ignorantly read, with loads of learned lumber in his head, with his own tongue still edifies his ears, always listening to himself appears. As a father, he urged his children to read, urged them to read all that they could in their own language, but also in Greek and Latin, which he read fluently all of his life. Carry a book with you on your travels, he told them. And memorably to his oldest son, he wrote, "You'll never be alone with a poet in your pocket." When he left with that same son, John Quincy, to sail for France in the service of his country, he read Molière all the way across in French in order to teach himself French. At the age of 80, he embarked on a 16-volume history of France in French. He became, for many people, the emblem of the transforming miracle of education. He became the emblem of the life of the mind. But John Adams was not simply a man who believed in the life of the mind only. He believed in serving the common good, He believed in serving his country. And between the time of the 14-year-old boy acquiring his first book and the President of the United States signing into law the creation of the Library of Congress, John Adams served his country, traveled farther at enormous risk in the cause of his country than any other American protagonist of the Revolutionary War era. He never had any money. He never had any social prestige. He was often thought of at the time by some who knew no better, and by many later who knew even less, as a rich Boston blue blood. He was none of those. He was a farmer's son from Braintree, Quincy, and he never acquired wealth, and he never, ever seemed to care about that as the object of life. That little volume of Cicero is on display. You can go and see it. It's one of the treasures at the Boston Public Library. And so too are 3,800 other books that belonged to John Adams. 3,800 books belonging to a man who purchased them when books were very expensive by our standards. And he had no money. What they tell us is how important books and the life of the mind were to him. And in many he annotated the pages, often arguing with the authors in the margins. And he didn't take on lightweights. He argues with Rousseau and Voltaire and others of that very intellectual Enlightenment era. In one book, A History of the French Revolution by Mary Wollstonecraft, John Adams, it would seem, when you first look at it, wrote more in the margins than the author wrote in the book. Adams had humor, and Adams had imagination. He had a love of nature, and he was a profound Christian. He was a devoted father, and he was married to one of the most remarkable Americans of all time, Abigail Smith Adams, who was herself a great reader. She never had the benefit of a college education. She was homeschooled, as we would say today, but she never stopped reading. And she was a wonderful writer, and their letters back and forth to each other, which are in the Massachusetts Historical Society, are a window on their time and their minds and their emotional life and the reality and the struggle of those days like none we have from any other Americans of the day. If they had done nothing but write the letters they wrote to one another, they would be people of consequence that we should know more about. Adams served as a member of the Continental Congress and played a decisive role in the passing of the Declaration of Independence. Without his voice in support of signing the Declaration of Independence then, it is very unlikely that the Declaration of Independence would have been signed then, and the consequences would have been very different as a result. Adams then went to serve in Europe as an emissary to France and later to the Netherlands, where he secured a loan that was as important as the winning of almost any battle. He got the money to carry on the war from the Dutch. And he went into Holland knowing no one, not speaking a word of the language, but he knew how to express what he felt as his mission. He then came back and served as our first vice president and then as president. 25 years of public service. But one of the most important contributions that John Adams made is one that I think is appropriate to recall today at this place on this occasion when we are celebrating learning. The Constitution of our state of Massachusetts is the oldest written constitution still in use in the world today. It predates our own national constitution by a full 10 years. It was written by John Adams here in Quincy at a little pine desk about the size of this podium. And in that Constitution, which sketches in almost thorough and complete detail the basic tenets of the national Constitution, 10 years in advance of that Constitution, there is a paragraph unlike anything ever written in a Constitution until then. And it is bedrock to what we believe and what we honor in our way with our own lives at this ceremony today. When he wrote these words, they were radical. He was convinced that the legislature would reject the Constitution because of this clause, or that they would eliminate the clause. In fact, when it came to a vote, they not only voted for it, they voted for it unanimously. Wisdom and knowledge, as well as virtue, must be diffused generally among the by the body of the people as necessary for the preservation of their rights and liberties. Wisdom and knowledge is essential to the preservation of rights and liberties. Jefferson said very much the same thing when he said, any nation that expects to be ignorant and free expects what never was and never will be. And as these depend on spreading the opportunities and advantages of education in various parts of the country and among the different orders of the people, meaning all people, it shall be the duty of legislators and magistrates in all future periods of this Commonwealth to cherish the interests of literature and the sciences and all seminaries of them, and grammar schools in the towns, to encourage private societies and public institutions, rewards and immunities for the promotion. Now here he lists what he thinks is important: agriculture, arts, sciences, commerce, trades, manufactures, and the natural history of the country. In other words, everything. And then he goes on, beyond academic disciplines, as we might call them, saying it shall be the duty to countenance and inculcate the principles of humanity and general benevolence, the public good, public and private charity, industry, frugality, honesty. Honesty is the best policy, said Cervantes. And punctuality in their dealings, sincerity, and yes, good humor. It's in our Constitution. There will be good humor. And all social affections, not affectations, affections, and generous sentiments among the people. When he wrote about generous sentiments among the people, he wasn't speaking of generosity out of the pocketbook. He was speaking about generosity of spirit to one another. Education was the key to our whole conception of the good society from the beginning. When they wrote in the Declaration of Independence about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that phrase, pursuit of happiness, did not mean longer vacations or easier work hours or more stuff. What it meant was an enlargement of experience through the life of the mind and the life of the spirit. Franklin, Washington, Jefferson, Adams, Hamilton, every single one of them talked about education as the gateway to happiness. Adams, Franklin, Jefferson, Washington, all of them attributed much of what they were to teachers that had changed their lives. For Adams at Harvard, it was John Winthrop. For Jefferson at the William College for William Mary in Virginia, it was William Small. On and on. The teachers and the book and the midnight oil, those were the three essentials of education, of learning. And make no mistake, they did not confuse information with learning. Information is one of our great attainments, instant information, constant information. We hear great acclaims for the information highway. Information saves time. Information means money. Information is valuable, no question. But information isn't learning. Learning comes from poetry and literature and eloquence from the speaker's platform when it's being enunciated by a leader who has political responsibility. Learning is wisdom. It isn't education, and information is not education that leads to wisdom. If information were learning, you could have, theoretically, those of you of the class of 2009, memorized the World Almanac, and you would be fit to graduate. You would be educated. If you memorized the World Almanac, you wouldn't be educated. You'd be weird. Too many of your contemporaries, alas, know too little of our history. Too many of your contemporaries, alas, are historically illiterate. And it's not their faults. They can't be blamed for not knowing what they haven't been taught. And it's a tried and true old adage at every commencement ceremony that your education is just beginning. And the reason it's repeated again and again is because it's true, and because some things bear repeating again and again. If your experience is anything like mine, the most important books in your life you have still to read. If your experience is anything like mine, the people who will open your minds, open your eyes to further understanding, have still to enter your lives. I write the books I write in order to find out. Every book I undertake is a journey in learning, and so it can be for you. Read, read, read. Take heart, take guidance from that other scholar from Quincy, John Adams, and his son, John Quincy Adams. I began with a book, that little leather-bound volume that first started John Adams on the way, the Cicero. I'm going to close with a clock not acquired by somebody at age 14, but a clock made by hand by an old man in his 80s over in Roxbury. His name was Simon Willard. Simon Willard was the most acclaimed master clockmaker of the 18th century and into the 19th century. Simon Willard clocks today are worth a fortune. He cut every piece of those clocks by hand, by eye, no measurements. He just knew how to do it. One Simon Willard clock hangs in the old Congressional Hall in our Capitol in Washington, now called Statuary Hall. It's part of a work of sculpture that hangs over the door into the chamber. The statue is of Clio, the goddess of history, and she's riding her winged chariot, and she's writing in her great book of history. And in the chariot itself is Simon Willard's clock, installed about 1837. The idea was that the members of Congress, those people serving their country, would look up at that clock to see what time it was, but be reminded by Cleo, writing in her book of history, that there is another time, another kind of judgment. It's the judgment that comes in the long run, that you too will be judged by history. It isn't just that you have to have an appreciation of history, but you have to have the realization that you will be judged by history, you who are serving the people here on the floor of the Congress. John Quincy Adams died on the floor of that chamber. There's a brass marker in the floor where his desk was, where he collapsed. John Quincy Adams was then in his 80s, and he was battling slavery eloquently. Old man eloquent, he was called, carrying on in his father's spirit. And when we look up at that watch, that clock today, that too has to be part of what we remember. If you look up at what's looking down on you in the present Congress, all you see is the television camera. Two kinds of time. Try to keep it in mind. It's exactly what Cicero said. Cicero also said that anyone who goes through life with no interest in anything that happened before he or she came upon the scene goes through life with the outlook of a child. I hope you see lots of the world. I hope you can enter into work that you love, choose vocations, if possible, not just for the money. And I hope that before you leave here today, or at some time very soon, you will thank, in person or in writing, those teachers here, those members of the faculty here, who have changed your way of seeing, who have opened your eyes to the world of the mind and the world of books. And wherever you go, please, before you check out of a hotel or motel, please remember to tip the maid.